Hi, everybody. This is Jose Palomino with another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. And today we're going to talk to a true manufacturing master, somebody who understands how to make a manufacturing operation really hum and get everybody, and this will make sense to you when you listen, everybody put that first step forward together. His name is Ray Ziganto, and we are really privileged to have him join our show today. So let's welcome Ray to Business Growth on Purpose. Well, welcome, Ray, to Business Growth on Purpose.
Hey, Jose, good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, because I think, Ray, we are kindred spirits, but before we get started with how we're kindred spirits, I'd like for our audience, if you could just describe what you do and who you do it for.
I'd be happy to, Jose. Thanks so much. I'm Ray Ziganto. I am the founder of Lenara International. And what I do is work with manufacturing companies to help them realize the potential and the growth and the opportunity that they're sitting on, but may not know they already have. So I'm a manufacturing guy by choice. Spent a lot of years in the job shop environment, domestically and internationally. I've mentioned in the pre-show conversation, I'm a recovering sales guy. But my real superpower is knowing how to connect all the different departments within an organization so they're all committed to and part of a growth strategy.
Right. So I love that thought of getting the whole team together. And what's amazing to me, especially even in smaller privately held companies, which I tend to focus on, I think you focus a lot on that as well.
Absolutely.
Is even in those smaller companies where you have a clear owner CEO, the functions are still siloed.
Yeah.
And they don't really, they talk to each other. Sometimes they grumble at each other. So it's interesting how you've come at it. And I love the term recovering sales guy, right? So that's good. I've heard of recovering accountants, but recovering sales guy is another one, right? So So Ray, let's start with the beginning part. That thought of this whole company is multiple parts have to work well together, right? So that's intellectually, I understand that.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard for a lot of companies to get their heads wrapped around, for a lot of people at companies to get their heads wrapped around?
If you think about it, go back to what's the genesis of the silos? And I love going back to this one because that same entrepreneur, that founder that started the company 20, 30 years ago, whatever it happens to be, when they were there, everybody wore a lot of hats. The owner was quoting the job, might do the engineering, probably bought the material. Somebody in the family was probably running the office. But at that small scale, they had a very clear line of sight of all the things that had to happen in order to delight their customer. And delight in the early days, there's probably more of a sense of urgency.
Right.
It's like, man, we got to make payroll and pay rent and everything else. But there was that initial chaos actually kind of worked. So what happens then is as the business starts to grow, because the owners got their hands on everything and can really manage the output and the quality and all those things, as the business starts to grow, the challenge owners face is that they've got to make a decision. Do we go out to the marketplace and try and find other people that can play so many different positions and come in and act like mini owners and wear lots of hats? Well, that's not realistic. They're hard to find. They're expensive if you can find them, so that's not going to work. So the default setting that business texts and colleges have been teaching us for years is, well, you start building expertise around functions. So you hire somebody to take over accounting. You hire somebody to take over purchasing. And that works for a while. That creating the silos, it adds some order, it adds some structure, it adds some process. And we've got a lot of history of being able to go back and say, yeah, but when I created these things, things got better. What you have to look at is in the time in which those books were written, when we added this structure and things got better, what was the operating environment like? There's a lot of statistics and facts out there that manufacturers today are working in an operating environment that is moving and changing at a rate and impact that is like unprecedented. And in that kind of an environment, our default setting is to try to continue to optimize the silos. Let's get them more technology. Let's get them more expertise. Let's automate these different tasks. When in reality, even in today's environment with the smartest people are and the tools that are available, what really helps organizations pick up agility and pick up speed is building connections across those silos. And we kind of forgot about that. It's wild because I go back, 35 plus years, my university days. And back then we were talking about breaking down silos. And it's like, shit, we haven't figured that out yet. So, but it's
Well,
like,
it's amazing when
yeah,
you describe it that way, because
yeah,
it really is, if you look at the early days of industrialization, right? So
yeah,
basically I put on the wheel, the other guy turns the lug nuts,
yeah,
and so on, right? Well, it's
yeah,
a very mindless kind of set of things.
sure,
We're in a largely, even in manufacturing, it's very much driven by a knowledge economy, right?
right,
It's all about managing your supply chain, managing
hmm,
those relationships,
right,
and it's a lot more complex.
yeah,
And yet, so that silo mentality really, and especially when it comes to functions, and I don't mean just like cross training people on the shop floor.
nope,
I mean finance, marketing,
hmm,
sales, those functions operating in silos.
oh yeah,
And they have to be, and then operations is like the last one to the table, because like the owner's thinking, I just went to a Vistage meeting and I got this inspiration. I'm going to be, I'm going to be I'm going to find my why, and that's great.
yeah,
But the operations manager is thinking, okay, but we're running like we're 100 days late on deliveries,
yeah,
cumulatively.
yeah, yeah.
So how do you cross that? That's really challenging. So Ray, how do you help somebody who says, I want to break the silos, I want to create these connections? What are some things that you help people do, and how do you help them do it?
Part of it is the action happens on the floor. So I do my best to get as much intelligence and insight as I can from the leadership team. What's your perspective on where the problem areas are? I mean, I'm sure you get the phone calls all the time. Hey, Jose, come in and fix this for me. If you could just make this pain go away, our life would be easy, be smooth sailing. The reality is, as you start peeling back layers, you discover that was a reference pain. It's not really the real issue that they're facing. Okay, it's like, my wrist hurts. Well, it's a pinched nerve in your neck. That's
Right.
the problem. I can give you ice all day; it won't help. Same thing in manufacturing operations. So to break those cycles, now you're getting into the point. It's easy to add machinery, in manufacturing, because people can look at it and go, yep, I get it. The new machine's 20% faster. That's fine.
Right.
As soon as you start messing with processes, which is really where we are, and even take it down a step further, you start messing with who has access to and can make decisions around information. Now you're screwing with people's, now it's getting personal. So if you're going to start kind of redistributing the information and the decision making, the first thing you got to do is go back and reestablish trust. Because chances are those same folks, if they've been there any length of time, have probably been through more than one management fad of the month. Here's something, like you said, now we're going to find my why. And in most cases, let's face it, you go to the trade organizations, and whoever the manufacturer is with the biggest lake house has the most people listening to them that work for their business. It might not necessarily work for your own. So part of it's some soul searching on the leadership side. Part of it is some very frank conversations. I spend a lot of time talking to the operating people on the floor. I don't, once we've had the initial introductions, I don't want the owner shadowing me while I go around. When I ran factories, if I really wanted to know what was going on, I'd go have a cigarette on the shipping dock, because the tool makers would be out there grumbling, and I'm like, what's going on? And it was like, I'd hear stuff I'd never hear,
Right.
from anybody else. So you've got to, it really is very much about reestablishing communication, connection, and trust, and being honest about where you're at. From there, you need, with that, you take the whole organization forward with you. It doesn't have to go fast, but if you've got 10, 20, 50, or 100 people all taking one step forward, that's colossal change in an organization.
Well, I love that word picture there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm imagining 100 people,
Yeah.
everybody, just the sound of 100 people taking that one step
Yep.
forward.
Yep.
Boom!
That's it.
It would resonate.
Yep. And then do it again.
Right.
One step forward. Because again, if you're treating the symptoms, my wrist hurts, then you got, sales and marketing, they take off and everybody else is looking around. Now what? You're selling stuff we can't make, we can't get material for. I don't have the people for. We've got capacity over here. Could you try selling that? Those are some of the conversations that can come up. And it's like,
well, let's dig in on that a little bit, because one of the biggest challenges now, talking to manufacturers, a lot of people, I'm sure you're running into this now, saying, hey, business has rebounded and I've grown 30% year over year.
Yeah.
And I always ask the question, I said, that's fantastic. And don't apologize for that.
Yeah.
Be happy with it. But is it because of something you did, or because rising tide raises all boats and you're not even sure if your cost structure is keeping up?
Right.
And one of the biggest challenges there, and you talked about connections and trust, is your supply chain isn't yet really part of that trusted chain. Inside, like, it's one thing to have 100 of my people in my company moving forward together, but how do I need my suppliers to be part of that. I need my customers to not, in this time, to not just be squeezing me for another 5 points because they know they can.
Yeah.
How do you build trust outside the organization?
Part of that is there's some similar things. I always start with data. The first thing I do in a customer that wants to grow, they usually say, I've got, I read somewhere that we should be in this industry, whatever. And everybody's like, medical, aerospace, defense, they'll go down the list of the favorites. Don't know anything about it. They just see that the graph is going like that and they want in. Then I start asking questions about their current customer base and margins and quote activity. And a surprising number of companies do not ever really marry that information together. And it paints an interesting picture. And the majority of times I find that companies are typically sitting on, I've never been to a client yet that couldn't wring 20% more top line profitable growth out of companies they already had, companies that were already in their vendor. Yeah. And it was like, and part of it is just looking at that. So it's like, well, what if we paid more attention to them? A little bit of Hawthorne effect. What if we had a really compelling reason to pay more attention to them and start having conversations about it? Same thing with suppliers, on the vendor side. Just like everybody got caught short with the, just in time on the inventory, and it's smart to be get as many turns as you possibly can. But even a basic premise of lean, COVID came out of nowhere and caught everybody by surprise.
Sure.
But a basic premise of lean is you maintain sufficient inventory to buffer the variation that occurs in your ability to meet your customers' requirements. Well, now that variation is really high, you really need to be reinforcing your relationships with your vendors and go back to them and have the conversations and say, listen, and I've done this with clients, I've done this in my own experience, where you find out who your key customers are, you go have conversations with them and say, listen, we'd really like to focus in on you guys. In fact, so much so that only the highest levels, or the highest levels of the company are regularly available for sales calls. You schedule regular quarterly reviews. How are we doing? Where and how can we improve? What are your forecasts? What do you wish you could do better than your competitor, Mr. OEM, that we're working with? And then go back, work with your supply chain and see if you can bring them an option. That's kind of, then you talk to your vendor and say, listen, I'm connected with my customer now. They're seeing these things on the horizon and we think we got a way to do it, but could you help us in this way? Could you spot plate instead of continuous strip plate this thing? Is there some other technology we don't know about? God forbid you ask one of your vendors for something that might allow you to improve, your business. So part of it is just opening that dialogue.
Right. And it seems like going at it from, being a little bit of a detective and a problem solver. Like you're actually looking to see, what do my biggest customers want from me, and then enlist my suppliers in trying to provide that value, because they're going to keep asking until they get it from somebody.
Exactly.
And it's not necessarily just price. It could be some of the things you alluded to. It could be a technical solution.
And that's exactly where you want to be, because if you were just selling on price, then just do an e-commerce play, and it's a race to it can be a race to the bottom, on some of those things. But the companies I work with, typically job shop type stuff,
right?
They'll have what really matters, the other thing that's kind of funny too, is they all say, oh, we gotta go out and get 1 trillion likes on social media and all these follows and everything. And it's like, that's helpful. But when you hit them in the face with, do you realize that if you had 3 to 5 of the right new customers, it would absolutely rock your world? You can go get 3 to 5 of anything if you put your mind and your resources aligned correctly, behind it. So it's very much about being that detective and finding, hey, what can we do better, faster than anybody else, that really adds value for them.
Right. And what's interesting about that, it's something I do very similar to what you do in terms of asking customers. The way I position it, I said, I love small lists. Yeah. If you were a manufacturer at the scale of like a Boeing or, a John Deere or something, then you need big lists to move the needle.
Right.
But if you're like a $30 million contract manufacturer, like you said, 2 or 3 significant accounts would rock your world.
Yeah.
As long as you maintain and can keep an eye on cost.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I'm always curious about with these smaller manufacturers. I still find them doing things like cost plus pricing, not value pricing.
Right.
And, there's still a lot of, again, the silos, a lot of old thinking. I had one client who I was starting to work with them, and their general manager of operations, they were consistently, in fact, when they had to quote a job with more than 3 or 4 operations, they could not quote accurately when it would be available. They didn't have to sit. And I said, well, have you considered, doing something with the local MEP center, do lean, do some continuous improvement work? And he said, no, that won't work for us. And I said, whoa. I said, well, I know that's not going to work for you. And it was, because you've just affirmed it's not going to work for you. So there's some of that thinking that's still there, and yet the opportunities are there to get better.
Yeah.
And I love, you could just go over your, like you said, go over your account list.
Yeah.
Who's doing well with us? What if I just talk to them and say, hey, Ray, what else can we do for you?
Here's the magic to that thing. You have to focus your efforts, innovate at the intersection where you're that adds value for your customer. Find out what that thing is. Mm-hmm. It might not be a technical, a really sophisticated technical innovation. It might be, instead of sending these things to you bulk, what if I found a way to pack them automatically on my end, and you got them, to where you could handle them? Or if you find that what's the bottleneck on your line, give it to me. And let me pre-assemble or something, so that when that part drops in your building, where your overhead structure is through the freaking roof, you've reduced part number count in your system. You've probably reduced vendor. Let me manage the buy of those things. You give me set it up on Kanban pulls or whatever. But find that thing, find the thorn in their paw. And that's where you talk to a lot of different levels.
I've seen examples where it's as simple as, can you deliver the finished product to me clean, like wiped down clean?
Yeah.
So I don't have to pay somebody to do that on my end.
Yep.
Just give it to me clean so I can use it right away, instead of having to go through another process before I can actually use what I just paid you for.
Yep.
So little things go a long way, Ray, and I really love that.
No, it's so important, and it's what the customers really want, your current customer base. What they don't want is to have to go qualify another vendor. Mm-hmm. They don't want to have to go through all of that. They'd like to reduce it. So, and you've already got the vendor number. So if you just show up and ask, show interest, again, at the highest level, and say, hey, here's our commitment. I've had clients that'll actually go in and say, you know what, we've selected you as a strategic customer for our business. And here's what that means. And that's the owner of the company coming in with the salesperson or whoever.
Right.
But really make a big deal out of it. And it's like, and here's what we want to do. What else can you share with us? Do you have, are you tracking history of, our delivery and on time? Because it's table stakes, but you've got to maintain it. That's important. As far as the cost down, the easiest conversation is, that's you can always say it's easier to reduce the unit cost when the volume goes up. So can we have that conversation? A lot of companies don't know what the total spend is, in their category or what the split is. They
Right. And they may be using multiple suppliers when they would just as happen to give you more of the orders.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And especially in the small job shop, because your world is your four walls,
Right.
and you figure I must have 20% of the market when you probably don't have rounding error.
Right.
And it's like
there's room to expand, room to grow, no doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Well, Ray, this has been a real pleasure talking manufacturing with you today.
I appreciate
and especially breaking down silos,
Yeah.
building trust, building connections,
Yeah.
problem solving, being a detective. We covered a lot of ground here. So if somebody listening right now said, hey, I'd like to know more about Ray and his work, where should they get that information? Where should they reach out to you?
I am always available and all over the place on LinkedIn. So just check me out, Ray Ziganto, out on LinkedIn. My phone number and email address are out there. Ray@lenarainternational.com. And I love talking shop. Conversations are awesome. It's been my experience in my career that the more people I talk to, the luckier I get. So please, if there's ever an issue or something you want to kick around, I encourage listeners, give me a call.
Ray Ziganto, thank you. This has been a real pleasure.
It was a blast. Thank you, Jose. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose. If you like the show, hit subscribe and leave us a review to help other people find the podcast. And if you're ready to take the next step in driving intentional growth for your business, come check out what we're doing at valueprop.com. We've developed industry-leading programs and systems to help B2B owners take control of their growth. Until then, thanks for listening to another episode of Business Growth on Purpose.